Hi, everyone, and welcome to this fast-paced explainer diving into the latest peptide proof report, the exact place where peptide science meets real-world application. We are going to be incredibly science-driven and data-rich today, unpacking a highly authoritative, evidence-based analysis of the global peptide market. Right now, we're literally setting the stage for a massive market shift. We're looking at a supply chain landscape that is being completely reborn, all triggered by a single, highly anticipated regulatory move by the FDA. Let's dive in. So to truly understand the sheer magnitude of this shockwave, you just need to look at this number, 50. That represents the explosive 50% surge in the stock price of telehealth giant Hims & Hers in just one single week following the FDA's announcement. 50%. It's a massive financial hook. Wall Street banks were completely caught off guard by this, but they moved fast, upgrading the company from a hold to a buy rating almost overnight. But what exactly happened to cause billions of dollars to shift so quickly? Let's take a look under the hood at the regulatory mechanics currently in motion. Section 1, the FDA regulatory shift. All right, to figure out the catalyst behind this financial frenzy, we really have to look at the FDA's timeline for reviewing 12 specific peptide drugs. See, in the past, these were strictly confined to the Category 2 bulks list. That meant they were heavily restricted, and compounding pharmacies needed these special, super rare permissions to even touch them. But the tides are definitely turning. Starting in early 2026, the FDA began holding expert hearings on reclassifying these drugs, potentially moving them toward open access. And looking ahead to July 2026, there is a crucial advisory committee meeting scheduled to potentially formalize this entire pivot. Now, the driving force accelerating this timeline is Health Secretary RFK Jr. and the MASHA movement. The administration's stated policy position here is quite clear. They believe overly strict peptide regulation hinders innovation and patient access. So this direct pressure is essentially the engine driving this regulatory shift, marking what is arguably the most significant change in peptide regulation we've seen in a decade. Moving right along to Section 2, the telehealth market frenzy. So you might be wondering, how does a policy shift in Washington translate to an absolute frenzy on Wall Street? Well, by potentially removing these 12 key peptides from that restrictive Category 2 list, the FDA is essentially allowing compounding pharmacies to bypass those old, towering special licensing barriers. And this directly benefits those massive prescription telehealth platforms because it just opens up the floodgates for direct consumer access. We're talking about vastly easier distribution of highly sought-after GLP-1 weight loss drugs and incredibly popular anti-aging peptides. The ultimate bottleneck is finally being removed. Which brings us to Section 3, the skincare ripple effect. But listen, this story doesn't stop at pharmacies. Not at all. If you've looked at a high-end skincare bottle recently, you've likely seen some of these names. Copper peptides like GHK-Cu, Argireline, Matricil, various signal peptides. What most people don't realize is that these cosmetics share the exact same upstream supply chain as the pharmaceutical peptides. It's all connected. Connecting the dots here means that a more open API, that stands for active pharmaceutical ingredient, supply chain for compounding pharmacies automatically results in a more open, robust supply chain for your favorite cosmetic ingredients. The math on this is beautifully simple. An open supply chain equals lower raw material costs, which means faster new product launches. And ultimately, that means better, more affordable products hitting your bathroom counter. This is just a massive, long-term tailwind for cosmetic brands. And it is perfectly timed with what consumers actually want. Recent data shows that TikTok searches for the term peptide therapy have absolutely skyrocketed, surging by 459%. The beauty market is ravenous for these ingredients right now, and the FDA's pharmacy regulations are inadvertently paving the way for a literal golden age of cosmetic peptides. Section 4, quality versus access. Okay, whenever we talk about rapid deregulation and opening up supply chains, we have to address the elephant in the room, right? Does deregulation mean lower quality standards? It's a fair question, and it's the primary concern for cautious, health-conscious consumers and established legacy pharmaceutical brands alike. Are we sacrificing safety for speed and access? To answer that, we really have to separate the idea of an expanded supplier list from the idea of lowered standards. Yes, the FDA is expanding the list of who can legally supply these APIs. However, the compounding pharmacies actually mixing these drugs, they are still strictly bound by good manufacturing practice or GMP norms. The standard of quality isn't dropping. Rather, the gatekeeping around who is allowed to try and meet those standards is being relaxed. It's a subtle but massive difference. It allows for more competition without officially lowering the safety bar, though, to be fair, it certainly increases the burden on regulators to police this much wider market. And that leads us to Section 5, the global manufacturing boom. To grasp the physical realities of this market, we need to zoom out and look at the global supply chain, because the numbers here are just staggering. Out of the 28 peptide drugs approved by the FDA since 2020, linear peptides completely dominate the commercial landscape, making up 61% of those approvals. Macrocycles and other complex structures make up the remaining 39%, though their numbers are definitely surging too. The main takeaway here, the industry knows how to make these linear peptides, and they are pushing them through the regulatory pipeline at a historic rate. But scaling this is absolutely not a free-for-all. The manufacturing environment remains incredibly strict. When a peptide drug gets a complete response letter, which, if you don't know, is essentially a rejection or a major delay from the FDA, 41% of the time it is strictly due to manufacturing deficiencies. That makes it the single largest source of regulatory failure. The chemistry is just incredibly complex to scale up. It proves that while access might be opening up on paper, the actual physical manufacturing of these molecules remains highly scrutinized and incredibly difficult to perfect in the real world. Let's talk about that scale for a second. 6.4 tons. Remember, peptide drugs are incredibly light, microdosed medications. We usually measure them in milligrams. To put 6.4 tons into perspective, that is roughly the weight of a mature African elephant. But we're talking about something manufactured in microscopic precision doses. The production of semaglutide alone consumes this much annually across 4 continents. It is an industrial undertaking of epic proportions and is putting a real strain on global resources. Because of this surging, literal ton-scale demand, the entire Contract Development and Manufacturing Organization, or CDMO, landscape is being radically reshaped. We are seeing these mega acquisitions happening in real time. For example, Corden Pharma recently acquired Ambia Pharm specifically to secure critical peptide API production sites in both the US and China. The biggest players out there are just gobbling up physical factories. Why? Because right now, in the peptide world, he who controls the manufacturing capacity controls the market. Which brings us to our final, provocative thought for today. There is currently $16.5 billion in capacity expansion underway globally. Think about that. Combine that unprecedented capital with the loosening FDA regulations we've discussed today, and the landscape is entirely up for grabs. So who will ultimately capture the lion's share of this reborn peptide market? Is it going to be the traditional pharma giants, the agile new telehealth platforms, or will the beauty and skincare brands quietly ride this wave to unprecedented profits? The data is moving incredibly fast, and this is one supply chain evolution you absolutely need to watch. Thanks for joining this explainer. We'll see you next time.